Hi there, welcome back for another Miss Ink Stamps video. This is Cassie. Today we are going to be making another Christmas card, and I'm going to be using this set called Blitzened. Love that set. I'm also going to pair it up with Starry Night and Perfectly Plaid. Those are some great stencils. And then I do have some of this Champagne Stardust sequin mix that we're going to use. We're going to do an interesting thing with that. So let's pull out some watercolor paper. This was just a piece that I had in my stash just sitting there. So I'm going to tack this down to the back. You could use like pixie spray or something like that, but I found that this worked fine because I'm going to make my background a little bit messy. So I'm just going to tack that down, and then I'm going to grab out some Rustic Wilderness Distress ink along with a blender brush. And then I'm going to blend that all over that background. I am not concerned with it having splotches or dark spots. In fact, I want that. I think that'll add interest to the background. And it's interesting when you look at this background with the stencil still on that, how it does look so splotchy. But then you pull the stencil away and it looks pretty good. So we're going to pull that stencil away. I'll clean up my mess with some water, but then I'm going to take that same water and I'm going to spritz. I did just a couple more. And then I just kind of kept going because it wasn't doing a whole lot on this 140-pound watercolor paper that I have. This is just some regular watercolor paper. It's not anything real special. It starts to blur a little, and so once it gets to the point I like, I'm going to pull out my heat gun and I'm going to heat set that until it is good. And then I need to trim this down because I want this to be an A2 size card, so I'm going to trim down this scrap. It wasn't even cut straight. So I'm going to cut it down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. That will be the full front of an A2 size card. And then I'm going to stick it to the back of my Starry Night stencil. I want to pull out some garnet red Nuvo Glimmer paste and just spread that all over that background like butter. Yeah. I got a little too much, got a little crazy. It's been a minute since I've pulled out any of my Nuvo pastes, but I'm just going to spread that all over that background, put the leftovers back in my container, seal that up nice and tight, and then not waste any time and take this to the sink to clean it off. If you don't have time, make sure before you do something like this that you have like a pan of water so that this does not sit on your stencil, because if it does, it will ruin it. All right, what you see is I have a laminator sheet. I'm going to pull in my laminator. It's been heating up nicely. It's just a Scotch one. I think I got this at Target because I broke my last one. And I'm going to sprinkle some of that champagne glitter all over that background, or all over the inside of that laminator sheet. I'll tell you what, I went a little overboard at the bottom. So you wouldn't want to put this much in there. What you need to do is make sure that if you're going to laminate some glitter, that you leave space for that lamination sheet to connect to the other side. And I didn't do that down at the bottom, so that will pose a little bit of a problem, but at the top we're fine. And there's enough static in the inside of a laminator sheet that if you don't go too heavy, you will have most of that just stay where it's supposed to. So I'll run this through my laminator. I'm going to run it through this way, and I'll flip it around and run it through that way just to kind of straighten it out and get rid of some of the wrinkles. And I apologize, my boys are wrestling in the background, so that's the jingling you hear. And by boys, I mean my cats. So yeah, so this is what I'm doing. I just wanted to see how I could get that to, maybe make an embellishment out of, or possibly die cut it. And so after I've run it through a couple of different times, like I said, just to kind of make it so that it's not all bumpy, I do decide to take a circle die and run that over a heavier part and a less heavy part. And when I did it over the heavy part, I had some of that glitter seep out, mostly because it wasn't completely adhered. But we have a couple pieces here. I can save some for later, but check it out. It's actually pretty neat. I like that. I think I'll have to do that again. I have another scrap of watercolor paper, and I'm going to put this into my mini Misty, and I'll tack that down with that magnet, pick up the stamp, which is that darling little mouse sitting in the martini glass, and I'm going to ink this up with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, nice crisp black pigment ink. I'll stamp that down after I get my finger in it. I'll stamp it down. And then I want to stamp it actually twice to make sure that I have good coverage. And then once I have that stamped down twice, I'm going to put some clear embossing powder over the top of it. I want a watercolor, and I have found that if you use clear embossing powder, it will give you a little bit of time, or not time, but it puts up a ridge, so that way when you're watercoloring, you can typically watercolor with one piece right next to the other without having to worry about too much bleed over. So it kind of makes a little well for the water to stick in. You'll notice that isn't always the case later on in the video. So I've got some of my distress inks up on my glass mat. You can't see all of it, but it is off on the side. I put down some Rustic Wilderness. The gray that I'm using is Hickory Smoke. And as far as watercolor goes, you usually want to start with one layer. You know, it works best in layers. So you start with your first layer, keep it kind of light, which is what I'm doing here. And I'm just putting down that first layer, putting down more ink as I need it, and moving on to the next color as I need it. So the pink that I'm using is Spun Sugar. I'm going to put that in his ear. And then the red that I choose to use is some Festive Berries. It's so pretty and nice and vibrant. So I'll use that on the berries, and I'll use that on his little candy cane. And I went a little dark with it, so trying to get some shadowing later on will be a problem. But you'll notice here, the wells don't always work, especially if you stick your brush right into the space that's right next to it. So I put water on it, I put my microfiber cloth on it, try and get some of that up, and then I'll just keep working it with the Hickory Smoke. And then I do decide to bring in some black soot. And I feel like that was a good choice as far as going with the Hickory Smoke. So I just watered it down pretty well so that it didn't look totally black. But this way I was able to add some shadowing to our Hickory Smoke. You can do it with the same color. It's just, it can be a little bit difficult. So sometimes it's kind of fun to bring in another color. So I'll put down a second wash, and it looks like he's got a beard. Don't worry, I will soften those edges with the Hickory Smoke. I'll bring in Hickory Smoke and soften those edges so that it doesn't look like he has so much 5 o'clock shadow. And then I'll bring in a little bit more of that Spun Sugar to darken up his ear. Well, after I do the Rustic Wilderness. So I'm going to try and darken the color on the leaves. Even though I think those look pretty good, we're going to try and add a little bit of dimension there. And then I will bring in some of that Spun Sugar for his ear. And I get it nice and dark at the top, or the edge. And then I'll clean off my brush and just use the water to drag that color out. And this is where I try to darken the candy cane edges, but I did make that pretty dark all on its own. So I'll do it for his nose as well. And then I decide for the glass, I guess it's more of a champagne glass, to bring in some old paper. So I bring in old paper. I thought that was a nice color. And then when I'm done with that, we're going to fussy cut this little guy out. I want to put him over one of those circles. So I'm going to use some foam tape. I'll cover the entire back of him with a little bit of this foam tape that I have. And then I'll just stick that right down over the top after I peel off that release paper. But I think that's fun. Since this is a champagne glass, I thought the Stardust glitter would go really well with him. So we're just going to peel off all that release paper and stick him right down to the top of that. My concern, that's why I didn't put this down on my background first, is that wherever I put the glue would show through, but I realized that I have enough of that glitter that it isn't going to show through. And this will dry clear. So I'll stick that down, and then I'll put a stamp block on top of it. And then we'll move on to stamping our sentiment, which I've got some black cardstock, a magic powder bag, and then we'll bring in that juicy embossing ink, stamp that down, and then cover that with some white embossing powder. Then I'll heat set that till that is smooth and melted. And once that's ready to go, I'll clean off some of that residual magic powder bag, and I will trim this down in my guillotine trimmer. I'm not going to put any fancy edges or anything like that. We're just going to have it be a nice little rectangle. And then we'll put some foam tape on the back of it as well. Since our little sleepy mouse has some foam tape behind him, we're going to put some on the sentiment. I'll peel off that release paper, and then we can try and line that up as straight as possible underneath. Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. How cute is that? For our card base, I just have some white cardstock that I cut down to 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches and scored at 4.25 inches. So it will be a side folding A2 size card. But I do have to do a little something on the inside, so I have the little reindeer from this set. I'm inking him up with that Rustic Wilderness. And the distress inks are not necessarily formulated for stamping, but it works fine when you want it to be a background. Then I decide with that leftover strip, I'm going to use a little Candied Apple Distress Oxide instead of using the Garnet Nuvo paste, because I want this to go on the inside of my card anyway. I thought this would work, so that kind of ties the outside to the inside. And then I'll trim that down to 2 small strips, and we will attach these on both sides at the very bottom. Not going full all the way into the center, this way it can close easier. And yeah, I'll have a little bit sticking off the edge, but I'll just flip that over and trim that off. And then we can get ready to adhere the panel to the card base. And I'm going to use some 1/8 inch score tape on that because this was a little bit warped, so I thought that would work pretty well. And I'll just adhere that down. Once we're done with that, that is going to finish off our card for today. I hope this inspires you, makes you want to go get a little inky. If you liked this video, please be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. Big thanks for watching, for using my affiliate links, all of the above. You guys are awesome, and I will see you very soon in another video. Bye, everybody.